In July, after 4 months of sitting idle in lockdown in Belgium, I found myself in need of a little adventure. So I borrowed my dad's bike and set out to cycle across Belgium from the French border through Belgium and over into the country of Luxembourg. The trip took 6 days and totaled 428 kilometers. The adventure began on the flat plains of Flanders in the Flemish-speaking part of Belgium, which offers a very smooth countryside ride along Belgium's incredible network of cycle paths and canals. These cycle paths and canals lead to the beautiful, well-preserved medieval towns of Mons and Namur, but also through derelict Mordor-esque post-industrial landscapes, especially when passing through Charleroi, once the industrial heart of Wallonia, which is in the French-speaking part of Belgium. By kilometer 225, the flat plains of Flanders turned into the hills of Wallonia, which themselves turned into the Ardennes Mountains. If you didn't know Belgium had mountains, well, neither did I. I planned the trip on a 2D map and thought it would be a smooth ride all the way to Luxembourg. Nope, that was far from reality.
I have reached the peak, and I think that makes me a true champion. And we're off. I just completed my first kilometer. So far the bike feels good. It's a good bike to begin with, and I'm not carrying too much gear, only the essentials. I've got my camera here up front. Here on this bar I've got my phone with navigation and my bags on the back with the tent. So just to give you a little bit of historic and geographic context, I'm in the West Flanders region of Belgium. This is where they speak Flemish, not French, even though I am close to the French border. And historically, this was the epicenter of much of the First World War and also part of the Second World War. So dotted around this landscape, you can find World War cemeteries. Let me show you some of these sites. I lost my drone in one of them a few weeks back, and here's the story of that.
Long story short, back in March at the height of the COVID-19 lockdown, I traveled to Belgium, which is where my parents live. I had previously been in the Philippines, however when the Philippines went into lockdown I had to leave and I was unable to return to the UAE where I had been living and working. Anyway, one day I was flying my drone on a windy day, perhaps a little too windy for my little high-tech toy. And with a big gust of wind, I lost control of my drone, which ended up getting nicely stuck 40 meters up in a tree, which was impossible to climb. Trust me, I tried.
Guess what? I just got my drone back. After 7 weeks being stuck in a tree, it was finally recovered. Yesterday, the tree team of the organization of the place where I crashed it recovered it, and I don't know if it works yet, but honestly it looks pretty good. So I'm 1 hour into my trip. I'm now cycling along the Lay Canal. I'm about 22 kilometers in, and I'm taking my first little water break. And for the first time it's really dawned on me how ambitious this adventure actually is. It's going to be very much a mental and physical feat, but I feel well prepared and well equipped. My previous adventures in different parts of the world have involved a lot of camping, so I know how to do that and I know how to cycle. So it's just merging both of those together. I think the hardest part of a trip like this is just committing and leaving the front door. So I've gotten that out of the way and it's been great so far. The weather's perfect, it's a little bit overcast so it's not too hot, and the countryside here is beautiful. So I'm entering Kortrijk, the closest big town to Ypres, where I departed from. It's quite amazing how I've driven from one city to another and never had to leave a cycle path or a fully segregated path where I'm never in mixed traffic. Yeah, Belgium does their cycling infrastructure really well, and I feel very safe, and the ride is very smooth and enjoyable. You don't have to watch behind your shoulder for a car coming. Yeah, fair play, Belgium. It's 8:30. I've been on the road for more than 6.5 hours and I'm about to cross into France. Here we've got a Bienvenue en France, somewhat understated sign, and I'm gonna guess this line right here defines the border. You can clearly see the Belgians invest more in cycling infrastructure than the French. I'm probably about 5 kilometers away from the campsite, but I'm so hungry. I got myself a box of chips from a little French roadside chip place, and I think I deserve them after all this cycling. Here it's very much the north of France. They have a thick countryside northern French accent. Bonsoir, je pourrais prendre des frites de taille moyenne?
Ouais, une taille moyenne, ouais, bien sûr.
Et une merguez s'il vous plaît.
Une merguez, bien sûr. Pas de sauce à part?
Vous avez quoi comme sauce?
Il y en a 31, donc vous avez le choix là en noir, tout en haut.
Ah, je vois bien. For me, it's funny to hear. It's the accent I grew up with. I grew up in the northwest of France, so slightly different, but still a thick countryside accent. So I've made it to the intended campsite. I'm gonna set up my tent and get a good night of well-deserved rest. Welcome to my new home. It's fairly cozy. On that note, so good night. Oh, good morning, good morning. Day 2. Today's either going to be a really big day where I cycle all the way to Namur, or a smaller day where I just go to a city called Mons. So I'm all packed up and pretty much ready to go. Time to get pedaling. Well, I just cycled through the city of Valenciennes in France. I'm on the outskirts now, and I'm heading back towards Belgium. And then I'll probably go to Mons. It's pretty straight from here. And we're back in Belgium. It's now time to cross the country. So I'm about 1 kilometer over the border into Belgium. And already the cycling infrastructure is so much. Whoa, I take that back. For the most part, the infrastructure is much smoother and safer, and there's a bit more buffer between me and mixed traffic. On the way into town, I bumped into Stan, the cycling man, who saw me looking a bit lost on the side of the road. I was looking at my map trying to figure out how to get to the city center. And he happened to live there, and he happened to be a local cycling and sustainability advocate and activist. And then when we arrived, we went for a beer, exchanged pleasantries, got to know each other, and he offered to host me, which was great because it was actually pretty cold last night and I wouldn't have wanted to be in a tent. And that's what he does. He takes in cyclists via a network called Warm Showers. It's like a couch surfing specifically for cyclists. So I'm leaving Mons after what was an awesome experience, full of serendipitous encounters. It was a very formative experience. He gave me a big rundown on the cycling culture, the activism that's taking place. He helped me plan out this route today. He's made sure that I'd be either along a canal or cycling along a river as I make my way towards Namur. So the way Stan put it is this first part of the trip, the first 2 hours along this canal, is a bit like cycling into Mordor. I'll be surrounded by very heavy industry, a lot of coal and steel plants, and it's gonna be noisy and dirty. But once I make it through here, this industrial belt that passes through Belgium, and I reach one of the rivers, it's gonna be green and natural and peaceful. I have spent many summers in Belgium, but always in the Flemish region, and as part of this trip I'm really discovering the Wallonian, the French part, and I've loved what I've seen so far. It's very shabby, very alternative, which is very contrasting to the experiences I've had in the Flemish parts. So that monstrosity behind me is essentially an elevator that can carry up and down barges into the canal, and these can weigh into the hundreds if not thousands of tons. And this exists because canals are man-made, and unlike rivers, they don't follow the path of least resistance, which is following gravity. And so man has had to engineer feats like this. I'm about 35 kilometers in, and I have to say, for the first time in 3 days, I'm struggling a little bit. My legs are feeling heavy. The weather is cold, gray, and drizzling. There's a lot of hills, so I'm going up and down, and it's not very scenic. I'm constantly surrounded by cars. This is a trip full of ups and downs, both figuratively and quite literally. Going downhill, finally go. Apples. Nice. Bonjour. La Sambre. The River Sambre. I am here. Oh, time for lunch. It's been a very difficult day so far. It's gonna be flat from now on, which is great. So reaching the river is great and all, except that the road is closed because there's roadworks. And the guy that lives in the house there tells me it's not allowed, but it's not clear if it's not possible. So I don't know what to do. Let's see. Some food first. So I had lunch. I thought about hopping that fence, but there was a worker there. And I was just told it's a €150 fine if you get caught. And because it was a worker, I would have obviously gotten caught. So I cycled back up the hill. And I found this wooden path that's going in the right direction, and it better take me to where I'm going. But it's a nice path nonetheless. This path that I took, that I was told by the people blocking the fence, led me back to the fence. Which is pretty frustrating. Okay, come on. Come on. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Ow. So I guess this is the construction they're talking about. I tried to go around it, but ended up right in the middle of it. What a waste of time if it didn't actually lead me to where I hoped to go. So I've made it to Charleroi city. That was a tough ride, even that last section. And it was quite surprising just how I'd go in and out of these pockets of beautiful nature, and then down next to this industrial wasteland. It's just incredible to see these relics of the past that are no longer economically fit to function, and the companies have no obligation to tear them down, so they just lie here in ruins. But to think that this was once a fully functioning factory of some sort. But it just makes you think that once upon a time, before man came around and completely altered these landscapes, they were just beautiful green forests next to a meandering river. So here it says, Les rêves de l'État sont nos cauchemars, which means the dreams of the state are our nightmares. Which is quite profound, to be honest. And I guess this was once a thriving city And when industry moved overseas or elsewhere, the inhabitants of Charleroi were sort of forgotten, and they went from being very economically dynamic to very economically depressed. And when that happens, because of greater economic forces, it creates a lot of suffering, and it's very hard to fix. It's hard to change a working class who are used to working in factories and retrain them to work in the new industries, which are typically the service industries. So in places like Charleroi, people have just been locked out of employment, and that's resulted in lots of social problems that are very difficult to solve. So not much of a break in Charleroi. I saw the outskirts. I didn't go into the city center. I might be missing something, but I can always come back in the future. I wanted to push ahead and get to Namur tonight, so I just went a little, stocked up, ate some bananas. So I'm gonna push out the next 45 kilometers, and I'm already 65 kilometers in. I took so many detours today. And shortly I will pass the 100 kilometer mark, which I'm quite excited about. I've done 90 kilometers in the past. Back in February, as part of the half Ironman, I cycled 90 kilometers, but I had a seriously fast race bike, perfect conditions. I have a bucket list for different adventures, different fitness challenges, and this is one of them. Cycle 100 kilometers in one day. Proud of myself. See you in Namur, hopefully in front of a nice cold Belgian beer.
So that marks the end of part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, where I reach the Ardennes mountains, and here the landscape completely changes from flat plains and canals to mountains, forests, and small river streams. Seeing as you've made it this far, I would like to thank you for your attention. I'm fairly new to video blogging, so I do welcome your comments and feedback, and I want to continue to improve my future video productions. I'm currently living in Cambodia and have a lot of interesting projects in the work. Stay tuned.